In the summer of 1863, the American Civil War had reached a critical juncture. The conflict, which had begun 2 years earlier, had already claimed thousands of lives, but neither side had gained a decisive advantage. The Confederate Army, led by General Robert E. Lee, had achieved significant victories, but the war was far from over. Determined to deliver a crushing blow to the Union and force an end to the war, Lee embarked on a daring invasion of the North. His target was Pennsylvania, and the town of Gettysburg would soon become the stage for the bloodiest battle in American history. Lee's plan was ambitious. By moving his army into Union territory, he hoped to strike a psychological and strategic blow, forcing Northern leaders to consider peace negotiations. He believed that if he could win a decisive victory on Union soil, European powers like Britain and France might recognize the Confederacy and intervene. The stakes could not have been higher. On June 30, 1863, Confederate forces began converging on the town of Gettysburg, unaware that the Union Army, under General George G. Meade, was already moving to intercept them. On the morning of July 1, Confederate troops clashed with Union cavalry just outside Gettysburg. What started as a small skirmish quickly escalated into a full-scale battle. Union forces, outnumbered and outgunned, fought desperately to hold their ground. By midday, reinforcements arrived on both sides, and the fields around Gettysburg became a chaotic battlefield. The Confederates, pushing forward with relentless determination, forced the Union soldiers to retreat through the town and onto the high ground south of Gettysburg. By nightfall, Lee believed his army was on the brink of victory. His troops had pushed the Union forces back, and he saw an opportunity to deliver a final, devastating blow. But the Union Army had not been broken. Instead, they had taken up a strong defensive position along Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. General Meade, understanding the importance of the high ground, prepared for a brutal second day of fighting. July 2nd saw some of the fiercest combat of the entire war. Lee ordered attacks on both Union flanks, hoping to break their lines. The battle at Little Round Top became legendary, as Union troops, led by Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, held their ground against repeated Confederate assaults. The fighting at the Peach Orchard, the Wheatfield, and Devil's Den turned those locations into slaughterhouses. Thousands fell in brutal hand-to-hand combat, the fields soaked in blood. The sun set on a battlefield littered with the dead and dying, but the Union line had held. Lee, undeterred by the failure to break the Union flanks, made a fateful decision. On July 3, he ordered an all-out assault on the center of the Union line. This would become known as Pickett's Charge, one of the most infamous attacks in military history. Over 12,000 Confederate soldiers marched across open ground, directly into the heart of Union defenses. Union artillery and rifle fire tore through their ranks. Yet they pressed forward, driven by duty, honor, and the hope of victory. As the Confederate soldiers reached the Union line, savage close combat erupted. But the attack faltered. The Union forces, entrenched and prepared, repelled the assault with devastating efficiency. Pickett's charge ended in disaster. More than half of the Confederate soldiers who had taken part in the charge were killed, wounded, or captured. Lee, witnessing the carnage, knew his army had suffered a crippling defeat. As the remnants of Pickett's charge staggered back to Confederate lines, Lee knew that his bold gamble had failed. The Union Army had held firm, and the battlefield was now littered with thousands of fallen soldiers. That night, under the cover of darkness, Lee began preparing for a retreat. His army, battered and demoralized, would have to make the long journey back to Virginia. The dream of a decisive Confederate victory on Northern soil had been shattered. On July 4, the same day that Union forces secured victory at Vicksburg in the west, Lee's army began its withdrawal. The rain poured down as his troops trudged southward, pursued cautiously by Meade's forces. The Confederate retreat marked a turning point in the war. Never again would Lee attempt an invasion of the North. The Confederate army, once seen as nearly invincible, had suffered a defeat from which it would never fully recover. The Battle of Gettysburg was the deadliest battle of the Civil War, with an estimated 51,000 casualties. Thousands lay dead on the battlefield, and many more were wounded or missing. The town of Gettysburg, overwhelmed by the scale of destruction, became a vast hospital as civilians worked tirelessly to care for the wounded. The aftermath of the battle was grim, with hastily dug graves marking the landscape. The fields that had once been filled with crops were now burial grounds. The Union's victory at Gettysburg did not immediately end the war. But it shifted the momentum in favor of the North. The Confederacy, now on the defensive, struggled to regain the initiative. Lee's army would continue to fight valiantly, but the defeat at Gettysburg had sealed its fate. The Union, buoyed by its victory, pressed forward with renewed determination. Lincoln, understanding the significance of the battle, would later visit the site to deliver one of the most famous speeches in American history. On November 19, 1863, standing on the battlefield where so many had fallen, he delivered the Gettysburg Address. In just a few brief but powerful words, Lincoln reaffirmed the purpose of the war and the ideals for which so many had given their lives. He spoke of a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the principle that all men are created equal. He called on the living to dedicate themselves to the unfinished work of those who had perished, ensuring that their sacrifice would not be in vain. His words resonated through history, defining the meaning of the Civil War and the American experiment in democracy. Gettysburg became more than just a battlefield, it became a symbol of sacrifice and perseverance. The Union's victory reaffirmed the strength of the Republic, while the Confederate defeat signaled the beginning of the end for the Southern cause. The war would continue for nearly 2 more years, but after Gettysburg, the Confederacy was fighting a losing battle. The road to Appomattox, where Lee would surrender in April 1865, began on the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg. The battle was a defining moment in American history, not just for its military significance but for the ideals it came to represent. It was a battle fought not just for territory, but for the very soul of a nation. The sacrifices made on those 3 days in July ensured that the United States would endure, proving that a nation founded on freedom and equality could survive even its darkest hour. The echoes of Gettysburg still resonate today, reminding us of the cost of war and the price of unity. The soldiers who fought and died there left behind a legacy that shaped the future of a nation. Their courage, their sacrifice, and their unwavering commitment to their cause ensured that the United States would remain one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.